On a quiet weeknight, while the city outside kept breathing in neon and traffic, someone who knew the floor plan by heart walked straight to a bedroom, and made sure a life ended before the sun came up. Ethan Ward had learned to live in two different worlds without letting them touch. From Monday to Friday, he was the polished software executive, early meetings, late emails, investor calls that stretched into the evening, and the kind of work pressure that never truly shut off. He kept a modest apartment closer to the office so he could reclaim the hours most people lost to commuting. The building was clean, modern, and forgettable in the way busy people prefer. But every Friday night, Ethan became someone else again, a husband, a father, a man who grilled dinner on weekends and listened to homework stories at the kitchen table. His family home sat in a quieter suburb where lawns were trimmed and neighbors waved like they had time to notice each other. Claire Ward, Ethan's wife, played her own part convincingly. To friends and relatives, she was steady and composed, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and hosted gatherings that felt effortless. She'd smile through small talk, her eyes bright, her voice warm. And yet, people who really paid attention noticed something else, the way she started checking her phone more than usual. The way she would step away to take calls. The way her patience thinned whenever Ethan mentioned work travel or staying in the apartment an extra night. There was another name orbiting the edges of her weeks, Jordan Pierce. Jordan wasn't family. He wasn't a colleague. He was simply a friend, said casually, as if repetition could turn a lie into routine. Ethan, for his part, seemed tired more than suspicious. He believed in schedules, in responsibility, in the assumption that love was mostly a matter of showing up. When he left on Sunday nights to return to the city, he hugged his children longer than he used to, as if he could store up warmth for the days ahead. The apartment, though, held its own strange loneliness. Ethan shared it with a roommate, an old college friend named Ryan Cole, who worked odd hours and rarely stayed in. Their place had the familiar clutter of two adults too busy to decorate, a sofa that had seen better years, a kitchen table used mostly for laptops, and a hallway where shoes lined up like a silent calendar. On the night everything changed, Ethan went to bed early. He had a presentation in the morning and a voice in his head listing deadlines like prayer beads. He fell asleep facing the wall, the room dim except for the thin city glow pressing through the blinds. Sometime later, the front door opened without force. Not a random rattle. Not a frantic shove. A calm entry, like someone who belonged there. Ryan, half awake in the other room, heard footsteps, measured, confident. Then the soft, urgent sound of restraint, muffled instructions, a sudden rush of movement, the kind of struggle that ends quickly when the other side already knows exactly what to do. The intruders didn't wander. They didn't search drawers. They didn't pause at the living room or kitchen. They moved like a rehearsed team, guiding Ryan and another occupant into a separate space, keeping them quiet, keeping them contained. And then they went down the hall. Straight to Ethan's bedroom. The attack was swift and controlled, carried out at close range, with gunfire directed from behind. No warning. No argument. No chance to turn around and understand why the air itself had become a weapon. When the building finally stirred, when a distant neighbor heard something that didn't belong in the night and called it in, sirens arrived to find a scene that made no sense as a break-in. There was no chaotic mess, no desperate rummaging. There was only the grim certainty of a plan completed. By dawn, detectives stood in the apartment's hallway, staring at the layout like it was a map to a secret. Someone hadn't just entered. Someone had been guided. By mid-morning, the apartment no longer felt like a home. It had been transformed into a controlled space of measured voices, latex gloves, and cameras that clicked softly as they captured every angle of the hallway, every footprint, every shell casing left behind. Detectives noted what wasn't there first. No forced entry. No overturned furniture. No missing electronics. The front door lock was intact. The windows were closed. Even the kitchen counter, usually a magnet for clutter, looked untouched. Whatever had happened here hadn't spiraled. It had followed a script. Ryan Cole sat wrapped in a blanket, his hands trembling as he tried to explain the night over and over again. He described waking to the cold press of metal, the sharp whisper of commands, the certainty in the intruder's movements. They hadn't asked questions. They hadn't searched his pockets. They'd treated him less like an obstacle and more like furniture, something to move aside. They knew where his room was, Ryan kept saying. They didn't hesitate. That detail stuck. The bedroom told its own quiet story. Ethan lay where he had fallen asleep, the bed sheets barely disturbed except for the violent interruption that ended everything. The angle of the shots made it painfully clear, he had never seen them coming. To the investigators, this wasn't chaos. It was intent. When detectives reached out to notify the family, Claire Ward answered the phone calmly. Too calmly, some would later say. She listened in silence, asked where she needed to go, and ended the call without raising her voice. Neighbors later recalled seeing her step outside, phone still in hand, staring at nothing for a long moment before getting into her car. At the station, she cried, but in controlled bursts. She dabbed her eyes. She apologized for being overwhelmed. She answered questions politely, if vaguely. Yes, Ethan stayed at the apartment during the week. Yes, she knew the roommate. No, she didn't know anyone who might want him harmed. But small inconsistencies crept in. She misstated how often Ethan stayed in the city. She seemed unusually informed about the apartment's layout, correcting an officer casually when he misspoke about the number of bedrooms. When asked who had access to the building, she paused, just long enough to be noticed. Phone records began to paint a parallel picture. Claire's calls and messages showed frequent, private contact with Jordan Pierce, far more than casual friendship would require. Late-night calls. Long conversations timed suspiciously close to the days Ethan stayed in the apartment. When asked about it, Claire brushed it off as emotional support, nothing more. Investigators didn't argue. They simply kept listening. Then came the financial records. Cash withdrawals spaced over weeks. Small enough to avoid immediate alarm. Regular enough to suggest preparation. Surveillance footage from nearby streets revealed unfamiliar faces entering the building the night of the killing, faces that didn't belong to residents or visitors logged at the front desk. The men moved with purpose, heads uncovered, their confidence suggesting reassurance from someone on the inside. The pressure mounted quietly. One of the men was identified first, then another. Their backgrounds intersected through family connections, shared acquaintances, and debts that hinted at vulnerability. When questioned, they denied everything. Alibis were offered quickly, too quickly. But cracks form under patience. After days of questioning, one man asked for water. Then a lawyer. Then, finally, a deal. He didn't cry when he spoke. He didn't shout or plead. He spoke like someone relieved to stop carrying a weight. He explained how the plan had come together, not as an accident, not as a robbery gone wrong, but as a job with clear instructions. There was a person who wanted Ethan gone. A person who knew his routine. A person who could describe the apartment hallway without ever setting foot inside. When the name Claire Ward entered the official record, the room fell silent. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was clinical. And once spoken aloud, it couldn't be taken back. Once Claire Ward's name surfaced, the investigation shifted from careful to relentless. Detectives reconstructed timelines with minute precision. Every call. Every message. Every unexplained gap. What emerged was not a sudden decision born of panic, but a slow, deliberate unraveling of loyalty. The state witness explained how Claire had approached the idea indirectly at first, never saying what she wanted outright. She talked about feeling trapped, about a future she could no longer breathe inside. She spoke about Ethan as if he were already fading, a problem waiting to be solved. Over time, hints became instructions. She provided details only someone close could know. Which nights Ethan stayed at the apartment. Which side of the bed he slept on. How deeply he slept after long workdays. She confirmed when the roommate would be present, and when he wouldn't interfere. Most chilling of all, she assured them the door would not be a problem. Access was arranged. Timing was rehearsed. Payment was discussed in fragments, spread across weeks to avoid attention. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was left to chance. When detectives confronted Claire with these details, she listened with a frozen expression, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She denied everything. She said she was being framed by desperate men trying to save themselves. She said her marriage had problems, yes, but not this. Jordan Pierce was questioned next. At first, he distanced himself from the plan, presenting himself as an emotional confidant pulled into something beyond his control. But records told a different story. Calls between him and Claire surged before the killing, then fell abruptly silent afterward. Witnesses placed him near meetings where logistics were discussed. His role was quieter, but present. Meanwhile, Ethan's family watched the process unfold with a grief sharpened by disbelief. They had buried a son and brother who had trusted the people closest to him. Now they sat through briefings and court filings, learning how carefully his final night had been designed. The arrest came without spectacle. Claire was taken into custody in the early morning hours. There were no raised voices, no dramatic resistance. She asked to change clothes. She asked about her children. She never asked about Ethan. During interrogations, she shifted strategies. She claimed coercion. She suggested she had been afraid. She insisted that conversations had been misunderstood, that plans had been exaggerated by criminals looking for leniency. But the evidence was layered and consistent. Call logs aligned with testimony. Financial records matched payments described by the witness. Surveillance footage placed the attackers exactly where they said they had been. And the apartment layout, every turn, every doorway, matched Claire's descriptions almost word for word. The prosecution framed it clearly: this was not a crime of impulse. It was a betrayal carried out with patience. As charges were formally filed, the weight of conspiracy settled over everyone involved. Each participant was tied not just by actions, but by intent. No one had stumbled into that hallway by accident. For the first time since Ethan's death, there was a sense of direction, of movement toward something that resembled justice. But the road ahead would not be quick. And it would demand that every lie be dragged into the light, one witness at a time. The trial unfolded slowly, each day peeling back another layer of the life Ethan Ward had never known he was living inside. The courtroom was quiet in the way only heavy truths can make it. Claire Ward sat beside her attorneys, composed, her posture rigid, her eyes forward. She dressed conservatively, her hair neatly arranged, projecting restraint and dignity. To anyone who didn't know the charges, she could have been mistaken for a grieving widow swallowed by circumstances beyond her control. The prosecution began by dismantling that image piece by piece. They walked the jury through Ethan's routine, his weekly commute, the apartment, the predictability of his nights. They showed diagrams of the hallway, the bedroom, the precise angles that proved the attack had been executed with full awareness of the space. This was not guesswork. This was guidance. Then came the testimony everyone had been waiting for. The state witness took the stand under tight security. His voice was steady, but his jaw clenched as he spoke. He described meetings held in quiet places, conversations that never used explicit language at first. He explained how Claire framed her husband not as a man, but as an obstacle, something blocking the life she wanted. He told the jury how she confirmed dates, how she reassured them Ethan would be alone in the bedroom, how she emphasized speed and certainty. He admitted his own role without excuses, acknowledging that he had chosen money over conscience. Defense attorneys attacked his credibility aggressively. They highlighted his criminal history, his plea agreement, the benefits he received for cooperating. They suggested he had every reason to lie. But then the corroboration came. Phone records were projected onto large screens, matching his testimony line by line. Financial documents showed the same staggered payments he had described. Surveillance footage placed him and the others exactly where and when he said they were. Even the timing of Claire's calls, before and after key planning moments, lined up with his account. When Claire testified, her voice remained controlled. She spoke of manipulation, of fear, of being drawn into conversations she didn't fully understand. She denied ever intending harm. She insisted she had been trapped between powerful men and a crumbling marriage. But under cross-examination, the cracks widened. She couldn't explain why she had shared such specific details about the apartment. She couldn't reconcile her claim of fear with her calm coordination. She couldn't explain why her communication with Jordan Pierce surged before the killing and disappeared immediately after. The jury watched closely. Some took notes. Others simply stared. Ethan's family sat behind the prosecution, unmoving. His mother clasped a tissue she never used. His brother kept his eyes fixed on the witness stand, absorbing every word like it was a debt being repaid. Week by week, the narrative solidified. This was not coercion. This was orchestration. And as the trial drew toward its end, it became clear that the verdict would hinge not on sympathy, but on intent, proven beyond doubt. Closing arguments stripped away what little uncertainty remained. The prosecution spoke calmly, deliberately, reminding the jury that this case was not built on a single voice, but on a convergence of proof. They spoke of treachery, not as an abstract concept, but as a calculated advantage taken against a sleeping, unsuspecting man. Ethan had been at his most vulnerable, betrayed by the person legally and emotionally closest to him. The defense tried one last time to redirect the narrative. They warned against trusting those who had already admitted their own wrongdoing. They urged the jury to consider fear, coercion, and the possibility that Claire had been swept into a plan she never truly controlled. But the evidence did not bend. After days of deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom stood as the verdicts were read, guilty on all counts. Conspiracy. Coordinated execution. Full participation. The words landed with quiet finality. Claire did not react at first. Her face remained composed, almost distant, as if she were listening to something far away. Only when sentencing was discussed did her shoulders sag slightly, the first visible sign that the performance had ended. The judge spoke at length. He described the crime as deliberate, methodical, and marked by a profound abuse of trust. He emphasized that each participant had acted with full awareness of their role, bound together by a shared goal and mutual reliance. This was not a momentary lapse. It was a decision sustained over time. Life imprisonment was imposed. One by one, the sentences were read, for the gunman, for the planners, for the woman who had set everything in motion. Additional financial penalties followed, meant to acknowledge not just the loss of life, but the devastation left behind. As Claire was led away, she finally turned toward the gallery. Her eyes scanned the room, stopping briefly on Ethan's family. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Reporters spoke of betrayal, of secrets hidden behind ordinary lives. The public reacted with a mix of disbelief and grim fascination. For Ethan's family, there was no satisfaction, only a sense that the truth had been named and could no longer be denied. Justice, they knew, did not bring him back. But it did ensure that what happened in that apartment would not be rewritten, minimized, or forgotten. One part remained. The longest part. Living with what was left. In the months that followed, the noise faded. Courtrooms emptied. Headlines moved on. The apartment where Ethan Ward spent his weekdays was cleaned, repainted, and eventually rented to someone who would never know what had happened there in the dark. Life, indifferent and unstoppable, pressed forward. But for those left behind, time behaved differently. Ethan's family returned to their routines carrying an absence that refused to shrink. His children grew older with memories that froze in place, weekend laughter, late-night hugs, the sound of their father's voice on Sunday evenings before he drove back to the city. Questions surfaced as they aged, each one heavier than the last, each answered carefully, painfully. Why him? Why like that? Why by someone he trusted? There were no answers that could soften the truth. The case wound its way through appeals, each one challenging credibility, procedure, intent. Each time, higher courts examined the record and reached the same conclusion: the evidence was sound, the conspiracy proven, the verdict just. The sentences stood firm, immovable as stone. Claire Ward disappeared into the system, her former life reduced to a name on documents and a past tense spoken by others. Jordan Pierce faded as well, his role recorded in transcripts and testimony rather than memory. The men who carried out the act lived out their days behind walls built from their own choices. Ethan, meanwhile, remained exactly as he had been. A photograph on a mantle. A voice in old recordings. A presence felt most sharply in quiet rooms. Friends remembered his discipline, his patience, his belief that responsibility mattered. Colleagues spoke of his work ethic and integrity. No one ever described him as someone who invited danger. He had simply trusted the life he was living. And that, perhaps, was the most unsettling truth of all. This case became a warning whispered rather than shouted, a reminder that some betrayals wear familiar faces, that violence does not always arrive with chaos, and that the most carefully planned acts often unfold in silence. Justice was delivered, measured and complete. But justice did not restore what was taken in that bedroom, in that single, irreversible moment. It only ensured that the story would end with the truth standing intact. And sometimes, that is all the living can ask for.